And then the whole focus, Tamerlan was now deceased, so the whole focus was finding Joe Carr in Watertown. And we literally probably had about 1,000 law enforcement officers out there, federal, state, and local, leading that effort to find Joe Carr. That was our primary goal, was to find him. We didn't know whether he had more bombs on him. We didn't know whether he had more weapons on him, whether he had suicide vests with him, but we needed to find him as fast as we possibly could.
You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from the Encore series, where we revisit past museum programs and conversations.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure and honor to welcome all of you here tonight. I'm Craig Floyd. I'm the chairman and CEO of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. It's great to see such a good turnout for tonight's event. We call this Witness to History, and we're going to explore the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing. The April 15th attack left 3 people dead: Crystal Campbell, age 29, Lou Lingzai, 23, and Martin Richard, 8 years old. And over 250 people were injured in that bombing. Within hours, the FBI was named the lead law enforcement agency to investigate this act of terrorism, and hundreds of agents poured into Boston after the attacks. Just 3 days later, on April 18th, Massachusetts Institute of Technology police officer Sean Collier was shot and killed while sitting in his patrol cruiser. It would soon be determined that the persons responsible for murdering Officer Collier were the same persons who set off the bombs at the Boston Marathon. They were apparently attempting to get his weapon when they murdered him. They were 2 brothers by the names of Tamerlan and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. Shortly after midnight on April 19th, the 2 brothers were spotted in Watertown, Massachusetts. Police officers from the area responded, and a fierce battle ensued on the streets of Watertown. Tamerlan Tsarnaev was killed, and Massachusetts Transit Police Officer Richard Donahue Jr. was critically wounded, but thankfully would survive. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev somehow managed to escape and remained at large throughout the next day. But more than 2,500 officers from 116 federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies arrived in Watertown to help with the search. They found and captured their killer by 9 p.m. that same evening, and the people of Boston finally had peace of mind. Tonight, to help tell us the story of the Boston Marathon bombing and the investigation and trial that followed is a very distinguished panel, including former FBI Special Agent in Charge Richard Delorier, United States Attorney Carmen Ortiz, and Watertown Police Sergeant John McClellan. And I'm very pleased to note that John was one of our Officers of the Month for October 2013, along with 4 of his Watertown police colleagues. And our distinguished moderator for the second in a row is Frank Bond, a journalist who has produced a number of award-winning documentaries for the museum, where he has worked since 1999. Before that, he had a 23-year career in television news, and many of us locals will remember that Frank was a reporter and anchor for many years at WUSA TV 9 here in Washington, D.C. So please join me in welcoming our esteemed panelist and moderator for this evening's event, Witness to History.
Thank you, Craig. Good evening, everyone. I know we're all looking forward to what promises to be an enlightening discussion of arguably the most chilling attack on Americans, again, on our soil since 9/11. Panelists who have joined us are all directly involved, as you heard, in the investigation, the manhunt, the capture, and the prosecution after the Boston Marathon bombing. So let's set the scene and get right to it. Richard, I want to start with you. The Boston Marathon is a local tradition which each year receives national coverage. What kind of security attention does it draw in this age of global terrorism?
Well, the FBI participates in security coverage events. We call them special events, where they're something like a Super Bowl or a one-time event that might happen once a year. We work through our Joint Terrorism Task Force and other components with the organizers of the event and with the state and local authorities who also have primary responsibility for the security of that event. We plug in to make sure we're feeding any threat intelligence information into that group so that they can prepare in the best way possible to make that as safe as event as possible.
And John, what role do police departments from the smaller towns that make up the greater Boston metropolitan area play on Marathon Day?
Well, it's a madrid of different things they do. Some of them traffic. A lot of them line the street of the actual marathon itself. Traffic details on the outside, but just presence mostly, the local police departments.
Richard, you mentioned the Counterterrorism Task Force. This is something that after 9/11 involves the federal and state and local police departments. Tell us about the structure of that and how organizing that before you get into a crisis, you hopefully are more efficient with your deployments and your strategies.
Sure, Frank. Well, the task force concept originated, I believe, in either the early to mid-1980s, I believe, in the New York City office. But long before the Boston Marathon bombings, each FBI field division had at least one Joint Terrorism Task Force established in their divisions. And some FBI divisions had multiple JTTFs in their divisions covering different territories. But it is comprised, the FBI has the lead investigative authority for investigating counterterrorism matters inside the United States. But it's absolutely essential that we bring state and local law enforcement partners in with us to actually have detailees from those agencies sitting within our offices, working shoulder to shoulder with counterterrorism FBI agents. And that is the most effective way to share information in a task force environment. So the Boston JTTF had representatives from probably about 10 or 15 different agencies that were with us, federal, state, and local. And that way, information is shared across the federal, state, and local spectrum. It's the model that is used right now.
And Ms. Ortiz, at what point did you and your staff start to pay close attention to this investigation and the events that followed?
Basically, from the moment that the explosions went off. I was in my office at the time that the two explosions went off on Boylston Street, and one of my executive assistant came in and told me about the first explosion. We were just starting a staff meeting, and I said, well, keep me apprised. Said we weren't sure what it was. It could have been a gas leak. It could have been a car. I mean, and but shortly after that, within seconds, a second explosion occurred, and I knew that this was completely unusual. And so I stopped the meeting. I went into my office, and it was interesting. The news of the explosions just spread like wildfire. Even I had an email from my daughters asking me, "Mom, are you all right?" And one of them was actually studying abroad in Italy. So the news was everywhere, and I immediately informed my family that I was fine, but I couldn't talk. And I called Rick, was the first person that I spoke to find out and get more information. And once I spoke to him, he told me he was headed to the scene. He didn't have enough information. He had spoken to the Boston Police Commissioner. I then spoke to the head of my National Security Unit to make sure that we would have prosecutors available to assist in the legal process and any kind of search issues or evidence gathering questions that would come up. And then I also reached out to the Boston Police Commissioner, Eddie Davis, at the time to find out what was happening locally. I couldn't get through to him. The phones went dead for a period of time. And so I reached his chief of staff at the Boston Police Department. And then once I spoke to them, I had made sure prosecutors were headed over to FBI headquarters and in our office over at our National Security Unit. I then headed to the scene and met up with Rick and many others, including the governor and the mayor.
These two blasts occurred at 2:49 p.m., the first, and then 13 seconds later, the second, a block apart. As we heard, 3 people were killed, 282 injured. And Richard, I want to go back to you because in this sort of an operation, information flow is so important, both from you out to the members of the task force, out to the public, but also from the public back to you because they may have some tips for you. This attack occurs at a time where the internet and digital tools make that information flow kind of like, as they say, trying to take a drink from a fire hose. Talk to us first about all of the photographic material you had coming in, both from the cameras in this retail district, plus all the people walking around with cameras in their hand?
Well, that was really, the video and the photographic evidence is really what broke the case for us in the first few days. And it was just an overwhelming amount coming in, but we were focusing on those video cameras that we could acquire from commercial establishments in the vicinity of the bombings. The American public was just fantastic in volunteering a multitude of their own personal photographs and videos that they were sending in. And we accepted everything, obviously, but we were particularly focused with our state and local partners on acquiring the videos from the area on Boylston Street that were nearest to where the bombs had gone off. And it was one of those videos which I first viewed on Wednesday morning, April 17th. That was really the crucial one that allowed us to first lay eyes on, at first, Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, and later that day we acquired a video through the Massachusetts State Police of Tamerlan Tsarnaev, and that video evidence really broke the case for us.
You know, in this internet age, we have these fancy words we throw around, crowdsourcing. The FBI and the press specifically used crowdsourcing 50 years ago. They call it America's Top 10 Wanted List. And it's the same idea that you out in the public may have seen something that are going to help us to get our man. One of the things that you couldn't anticipate is that both news organizations and individuals are at home manipulating some of this material, trying to help, but in the media case, trying to get ahead of the story. And so you end up with a newspaper printing, "These are the guys." So what goes through your mind when you know, you're doing everything humanly possible and then you get this misstep? It's not your misstep,
Sure.
but it is certainly something you have to deal with and you have to respond to.
Well, that first occurred, as I recall, on Wednesday, April 17th. There was a false media report in a New York newspaper that showed two individuals, one of whom had a backpack and a white hat, claiming that we were looking for those individuals, and those were innocent individuals that had nothing to do with the bombing. That was media error number one. And there was also a report from a national news organization later that day. I recall it was early afternoon, or maybe late morning, early afternoon, that claimed on TV that we had a subject under arrest for the Boston Marathon bombings, which was totally false. And it caused me to have to get with Carmen, and we had to draft a response, basically a press release debunking the false media reports that came out, and that distracted us for a couple of hours that afternoon, and we were obviously extremely busy in the investigation, rebutting the false media reports.
In particular, the information that came out, I think CNN was the first to report it, John King, that we had an individual in custody. I even thought we had, I remember seeing, because we had the screens up, and I went to Rick, I said, "We have someone in custody?" He says, "We don't have anyone in custody." And so that was a problem, because what happened was that people, journalists and others from the public, started to congregate and crowd the courthouse, the federal district court in Boston. And I spoke to my press person, my public information officer, and she got on the phone with a number of media outlets that were also calling her to confirm that we did have an individual in custody. And we repeatedly told folks that we did not have. And I believe it was CNN and then the AP that was reporting or wanted to. And CNN went forward. We indicated, "You're wrong. We don't have anyone in custody." They felt that they had reliable sources that told them we did have someone in custody, but didn't want to reveal it so that we could bring him or her into the courthouse quietly. What happened is it really was very chaotic. We had hundreds and hundreds of people surrounding the courthouse. We then had a bomb threat called into the courthouse, and employees were very, staff members from my office, as well as the clerk's office, the court, all running out of the courthouse. It was very chaotic for a period of time. And others, though, observed and did not report the story. There was other media outlets that basically, listened to us and believed that we didn't have anyone in custody. And then as the day wore on, it was clear we did not have anyone in custody. And those that, I think it was just one or two that had reported it, it was clear that they had made a very, very serious mistake.
You mentioned chaos. The media, the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, I think for all of us, we would say our own credibility is coin of the realm. You've got to maintain that. At what point do you look at those news reports and say to yourself that you need to keep up with what is being reported, but that's not necessarily a source of information. My source of information is going to be Richard and the task force?
Oh, absolutely. I don't rely on that source of information. I mean, the media is terrific at learning and getting information and reporting it, and certainly providing leads that we can pursue. But in terms of reliance and is this credible evidence and what's happening next in the investigation, I rely on law enforcement.
And the FBI reaches over the head of the media through your website directly to the public, but the response is so overwhelming that for a while it crashes the website. Another distraction, and that you eventually got out from under, but
Sure.
your head has to be pounding at this point.
It was. The response from the American public was so overwhelming that it did overwhelm our website for a certain period of time before we could get it corrected. But it just shows that even in today's age of broadband, there are still limits upon how much information can be pushed through a certain channel to law enforcement, especially when in a situation as dramatic as the Boston Marathon bombing was.
As you mentioned, by 5 p.m., April 18th, you're able to put out the video of suspect 1 and suspect 2. You're back on stride. You appeal to the public. They come out of the woodwork to help. And at 10:33, MIT police officer Sean Collier is found dead in his patrol car. What does this tell you about the people you're looking for? What does this tell you about the nature of the pursuit going forward?
I recall after that press conference, I got home that night, Frank, and I saw in the 11 o'clock news the news about the tragic murder of Officer Sean Collier. And at first, I didn't link it directly to the Boston Marathon bombing or to the press conference we had just done earlier that day. I thought it was a tragic, yet very strange. Cambridge is a very safe city, and it's particularly safe for law enforcement, but I didn't link it to the Boston Marathon bombing. But I learned about an hour later, after I'd gone to bed that evening, one of my assistant special agents in charge, Jeff Sillette, called me and said that the subjects who murdered Officer Sean Collier were the ones we wanted in our we displayed in our press conference. We wanted for the bombings. They were involved in a firefight with the Watertown Police Department with John McClellan and his brave officers, and they were hurling bombs at the Watertown police officers. When I heard that at 12 o'clock at night, I was just astounded, and I jumped out of bed and threw a pot of coffee on and got dressed and headed into the command post as fast as I could.
We have some audio that I want you to listen to. It's from Sergeant McClellan's police radio. This shootout just after midnight in Watertown, a violent confrontation. And let's listen to the tape, and then we'll talk about it with Sergeant McClellan.
Shots fired, all units respond. Force and take, Hector Fernandez, are shots fired. Shots fired, shots fired. Where are they, 468? We got a shoot out in front of the car on Wallace. Cherry State vehicles stop, protect their lobby, have them pinned down. Okay, 876, looks like they are. Might have been taking an M80.
Bigger than M80s. These are the bombs that they're throwing at the police. It sounds more like a military firefight than a confrontation with police in a small town. Tell us about that scene.
Well, it was at that time when I said it was bigger than an M80. The first bomb had gone off. I didn't see it come through the air. I had made the decision a couple of seconds earlier to jump up into my SUV and put it in drive and send it towards the bad guys. At that point, I was looking downrange. There was only two, myself and Officer Reynolds there. Our closest backup was probably about 3 or 4 minutes away, and I had two vehicles in front of me with 6 doors open. I didn't know how many bad guys we had that we were looking for. My only thought was I need to get some cover, cause a diversion, try to figure out what we're going to do with two officers against how many we have. I I jumped up, threw the car in drive, pointed it towards them, and my thinking at the time was get behind the tree, see who pops out, take a couple of shots at them, see how many I can knock down. I was thinking we had 5 or 6 people because of all the doors open. The cruiser took the first bomb. It landed right by the passenger side tire, and it blew out the whole side of my SUV. And that's why I said that. It wasn't that. I heard it, but I didn't see it, and it wasn't that impressive till the second one came in, and then there was no vehicle in front of us, and that was a real head shaker. But it was you're right. It was multiple gunshots, over 300 rounds between us and them. It was it's something you can't train for in our department. More like war than a street firefight.
Your thinking is where your training kicks in, they say, but I'm guessing you never experienced anything at that level, or had you?
No, I've never fired my gun and out on the street other than practice.
So Richard, what does this tell you at this point? Now you've had this, now you've made the connection. Sergeant Collier Officer Collier, that is part of this case. Now you've got the shootout, and they're throwing bombs at police, and you're back calling the shots. What's going through your mind?
Well, we immediately converged to Watertown. We raced to Watertown. I live about an hour. I live southwest of Boston, so it took me about an hour to get to Watertown. But we went to a location called Arsenal Mall, which the state police had basically just taken over this mall in the middle of the night. They had rolled their mobile command post out there. And I met with Commissioner Davis and Colonel Albin from the Massachusetts State Police, Chief DeVoe from the Watertown Police Department. We're all there, and we had just hundreds and hundreds of law enforcement, federal, state, and local law enforcement officers converging on this parking lot at the mall where the state police had set up their command post. The JTTF leaders, myself, Ed Davis, Tim Albin, Carmen arrived. We convened inside the command post and basically tried to sort out what we knew and what we didn't know from the events that had taken place, starting with Officer Collier's murder to the shootout in Watertown. To the at that point we knew Tamerlan Tsarnaev's name. We had fingerprinted him on the streets in Watertown there, and very shortly after identified him. And upon that initial identification, we were able to identify Dzhokhar as his brother as well. So we knew their names at that point. We knew who we were dealing with and who we were looking for. And then the whole focus, Tamerlan was now deceased, so the whole focus was finding Dzhokhar in Watertown. And we literally probably had about 1,000 law enforcement officers out there, federal, state, and local, leading that effort to find Dzhokhar. That was our primary goal, was to find him. We didn't know whether he had more bombs on him. We didn't know whether he had more weapons on him, whether he had suicide vests with him. But we needed to find him as fast as we possibly could.
So you issued a shelter-in-place directive for the residents. How was that done, and over how wide an area? Was it just Watertown, or was it a wider area?
It was directed by the governor, based upon, I'm sure, a recommendation from Colonel Albin and the Executive Office of Public Safety for the state of Massachusetts, Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It was made that morning. It was the correct decision. It was made for the city of Boston and certainly Watertown, Cambridge, and probably about 8 or 9 different surrounding towns. The governor just wanted people off the streets so law enforcement could continue their search in Watertown until we had this individual arrested.
John, based on your knowledge of Watertown, how traumatic was this for those residents? There's a killer at large. We think he's in Watertown. We want to capture him here and end this here. Stay where you are.
Yeah, it was, I'm sure, very traumatic for all of them. I mean, it was traumatic for police officers, and that's our job. It was until they took him out of that boat, I was taken off duty right away and went to the hospital to get checked out, and then went home. I was home with my wife, and I couldn't stop thinking about, all the people in those houses. I mean, we had bombs going off, the pressure cooker bomb. They threw 4 bombs, 2 of them went off, 2 of them did not go off. I was, in all the bullets that went up and down the street, I was deathly afraid that someone was in one of those houses that was either hurt or killed. And that was very worrisome for me. I was a supervisor on the street. I'm worrying about my guys. I have older officers that you come to work with 8 guys under your command. You want to go home with 8 guys under your command, and I had a Madrid of officers with 35 years on the job, and I had an officer with 6 months on the job. So, it was a lot of stress.
Ms. Ortiz, in the meantime, your file is growing. You've got the bombing itself, the murder of Officer Sean Collier. Now the lone suspect has run over and killed his brother. Are you starting, what kind of calculations are you just keeping a tally until we get to the point where the investigators and law enforcement can hand things over to you, or are you starting to calculate and plan what happens next once you get the ball?
Well, I obviously I was thinking about what steps would be taken once he was apprehended, but as John says, that time frame was incredibly stressful. We didn't know if he was, if Jokar was working with anyone else. We didn't know where he was. Was he still in Watertown? Could he have taken the train and be somewhere in Boston? We really were more concerned with finding him, making sure there was no one else involved, that no one else was going to get hurt. And so that's what I was focused on, and really providing the support, the legal support, to make sure that we could conduct investigations. We were issuing subpoenas to get phone records and to search other locations. Once we identified Jokar, we started to identify friends. We knew he went to UMass Dartmouth. We had law enforcement out at Dartmouth. I had prosecutors at FBI headquarters, at the command post in Watertown, as well as working in our national security unit. So really, our role at that point was to assist law enforcement do its job, and then be prepared once he was apprehended to then bring certain charges and make sure that he remained in custody.
Richard, priority number 1 is to find the guy. So there's a door-to-door search carried out in Watertown. Tell me how that worked, who did it, and what the drill was at each home.
It was various JTTF components that did the grid search. Basically, it was a grid search where the area was divided up into certain parcels, and law enforcement officers would go out house to house, basically, and look for, and touch base with each house to see if they had seen anything or if they had knew anything about Jokar Tsarnaev. So it went on through the night, and started as soon as he had escaped, and then it went through his ultimate capture at about a little up after dinner, about 8:00 p.m. on Friday the 19th.
And that shelter in place had been, after the door-to-door search, lifted between 6 and 7, and then we see the power of see something, say something. You get a 911 call. Tell me about that call.
Well, we got a law enforcement received a call from a very courageous individual named David Henneberry, who lived in Watertown. And when Governor Patrick lifted the shelter-in-place designation, David Henneberry went out into his backyard, and he had a boat in the backyard had been shrink-wrapped for the winter, and it was a breezy evening that day, and he saw the shrink wrap blowing in the wind like it had become dislodged. He put a ladder up against the boat, climbed up inside, and peered inside, and saw Jokar Tsarnaev alive, sleeping but alive, inside the boat, and of course very bloody, and immediately called 911. Our command post at Arsenal Mall, where we had been based all day on Friday the 19th, you probably had hundreds of law enforcement officers responding to that scene of Mr. Henneberry's house, and it was really a dramatic moment. And my understanding is, I wasn't there. I stayed at the command post, but shots rang out, and for a period of time before it stopped. And then we had brought the FBI hostage rescue team up from Quantico that day in anticipation of searching Jokar's dorm room down at University of Massachusetts Dartmouth. We had one FBI SWAT team stay at the base, and one team went down and executed the search in Dartmouth. So we brought the HRT team up, combined with the Watertown police officers, state police, many other local, federal, state, and local officers, and established a perimeter around him once he was located.
We all remember the scene. We saw it on television, people cheering in the streets, horns blowing after the capture is made, that the nightmare is coming to an end. John, you had to be proud of your hometown, the citizens, the way they responded, the way your department responded. Tell me about just all the feelings that you must have been feeling at that point.
Yeah, I would have loved to have seen it live. I saw it on TV like everyone else. My gun taken away from me. Stay at home, don't leave. But it was great. I've seen a lot of film on it. I've spoken to a lot of residents in the town. I'm a big community police officer. I know a lot of the people in the town, and I'm reminded of it every day. But it's great to be part of something that brings the public closer to law enforcement, even if it was only for a week that they liked us. It was a good week. It was a great week.
So now, Ms. Ortiz, the ball is in your court. What are your top priorities as you prepare to move this to trial?
Well, it started with the press conference that we had that night, especially after the capture, to announce that we had someone in custody and provide further information. And as all of the law enforcement officials, my colleagues were saying, this was a great day, we found him, our job is done, our job is over. I was thinking, wait a minute, my job is just beginning because we now have to move forward with the case. And some of the key steps that are taken is, charges were initially brought because you have to bring them right away once you have someone in custody through a complaint. But we put together our prosecution team, some of which consisted of lawyers that have been working on the case. Although we had many, many lawyers from our office working during that week of investigation. It really was all hands on deck. In addition to prosecutors from my national security unit, we had prosecutors from our cyber crimes unit, our major crimes unit, and other units throughout the office that participated in round-the-clock assistance to the FBI and other law enforcement officers. So just thinking ahead, it was, sitting down and figuring out what charges would be brought, putting the prosecution team together, making sure that they had the right resources as things would develop, talking to my colleagues. I had to deal with the district attorneys from Suffolk County and Middlesex County because these were multi-jurisdictional crimes, even though it was clearly a federal matter, but many of the crimes that occurred could be considered state crimes as well. And most importantly, front and center, and Rick and I participate in this, initially responding was after the capture, was going out and meeting with the victims and potential witnesses and bringing them up to date in terms of providing them with information, telling them what to expect as the criminal justice process moved forward, and keeping them apprised of how things were proceeding throughout the case up and through the trial and sentencing in the case. In addition to just putting the case together, bringing the charges, was the consideration of the death penalty. Because a number of the charges that we brought were death penalty eligible, and going through the death penalty protocol that exists with the Department of Justice to determine whether or not the Attorney General would authorize and really would move for that.
I want to get back to the victims and their role in the actual trial itself, but I want to stick with the death penalty aspect of it now, because this was one of those cases where it was a local crime that was committed, but under a national spotlight, and no matter where you lived in the country, you felt that you were attacked. And a lot of people at that event had come from all over the country to participate in the Boston Marathon. And as you go to trial, certainly it's going to be the local jury that's going to decide the case, and the defense is going to put the death penalty up for referendum. Oh, spare his life, he was manipulated. How do you prepare your case knowing that's coming down the pike and kind of to vaccinate yourself against that?
Well, I think that once the Attorney General authorizes the death penalty, and clearly I think given the gravity of the crimes and the harm, and the motive for the crimes. This was a political crime, a crime that was committed to intimidate Americans, and other factors as well that justified seeking the death penalty. Then it was obviously investigating and gathering all of the information and evidence that would support that premise. Just as the defense argued that, this was a young man, and a young man that was manipulated or brainwashed by his brother. That was part of the defense. But it would be for the jury to decide. And eventually, after we tried the liability case, whether the guilt phase, we went through the guilt phase, then we presented the evidence that we believe the aggravated factors, as they're called, defense presented mitigating factors warranting against it, and then the jury eventually ruled that he would get the death penalty only on the charges which related to his placement of the bomb behind the Richard family, and Lindsay Lou was there as well. So he only got the death penalty with respect to his specific action and not the deaths that occurred as a result of Tamerlan placing the bomb, further down Boylston Street, the bomb that killed Crystal Campbell, and certainly the murder of Officer Sean Collier several nights later.
The jury did hear from victims and victim survivors. How important was that experience for the jurors in this case?
I think it was critically important to sit there and listen to what had occurred from their perspective, what they had experienced, the pain and suffering, and even more so the pain and suffering that many of them were still undergoing. Some individuals are living in horrible pain. There were many amputees that appeared before court, and folks who are still living with side effects. One of our survivors is a young man who lost one leg, is in the process possibly trying to save his second leg, and has fragments of a bullet that is still lodged near his heart. He could die at any moment. He has to live with this every day. We had others who testified as to the many surgeries that they have undergone since the explosion and what life means to them day to day. Victims are not allowed to speak, to testify as to whether or not they want the death penalty, just in terms of the impact of the crime and what the harm has meant to them.
I want to ask all three of you, not only what lessons were learned relative to your professional, but what you learned about us as a people, the community that you live in and serve, through this experience that you're going to take forward with you no matter where you go. Let's start with you, Richard.
Well, Frank, I have three key thoughts on that. From the law enforcement perspective, it was the importance of having outstanding pre-established law enforcement relationships at the federal, state, and local level in place prior to the onset of a crisis situation. It made us easily be able to come together on that first evening of Monday, April 15th at the Westin Hotel in Boston and be able to sit with the governor and the mayor and make decisions in a collaborative manner and an effective manner. And that allowed us, the second point is communicating clearly in a crisis situation and demonstrating a unified command and control of the situation. You have to demonstrate to the citizens of the city, the state, and the country, and indeed the world, that you have a great law enforcement team in place. We're going to get to the bottom of this. No resource will be spared in getting to the bottom of this. And you have to communicate that clearly to the American public. And that's what we attempted to do during the press conferences we held during that first week. And my third key outtake goes exactly to what Carmen just mentioned about having empathy for the victims of a mass casualty event, such as the Boston Marathon bombing. In the weeks afterwards, Carmen and I and others, we visited with Dick Donahue in the hospital. We visited with many other victims, and it's just a very moving experience to walk into a Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital in Boston and see a poor victim that's just had their leg amputated below the knee, and look at them, and none of them had anger, hostility. They were just worrying about how they were going to move on with their lives, dealing with this new reality. How do I get to the grocery store? How do I get up the steps to my house? They had very basic concerns that they were worried about, but they were all so incredibly courageous and had a sense of perseverance and a sense of hope. It was just a remarkably moving experience for all of us to visit with those wounded law enforcement officers and victims. And having empathy for the victims and their families, as Carmen mentioned, is one of the key outtakes that I'll never forget from the investigation.
John?
To me, it's the people, the citizens, the people still to this day, 2.5 years later, still thanking members of our department. People still calling our department. Just people will never forget it. they may forgive, but they'll never forget it. And I think that's a good way of going at it.
Ms. Ortiz?
Well, no question. I think I totally agree with Rick's first point. I never really, by the end of that week, I truly appreciated the value of the relationships that we have forged. And I've been in this business for a long time, and I had worked with quite a number of my colleagues for years. But some I had just new established relationships, like with Rick. And I think maintaining that communication, the ability to work together, collaborate, communicate was critically important to having things move the way that they did that week. Secondly, I think a biggest takeaway that I felt tremendous pride and humbleness at having the opportunity to be in this position, to be able to play a role in working on the investigation and in helping the victims deal with what had occurred, and being able, especially once we did have someone in custody and the case moved forward, really doing everything that I could, along with obviously my staff, my office, to make things as smooth as possible. They were never easy. I think I repeatedly told survivors that this process is going to be hard. It's going to be painful. It's never going to be easy. We can't make it easy, but maybe we can make it just a little bit more tolerable, just a little bit easier, dealing with what their needs were, and just helping them understand the process. And then finally, really feeling tremendous pride of being an American, at seeing everyone come together the way they did, at having the strength, the courage, the resiliency. It just leaves you with such an emotional effect, that they have dealt with such tremendous loss and pain and suffering, that we have dealt with this sense of violation in our own world, and yet we can all come together and really be grateful for who we are and where we are. And it just will always stay with me.
And it must have been incredibly gratifying the following year and the next year that the Boston Marathon goes on,
Yeah.
and people come, and we look forward to it, and they participate, and that has to be, a testament of approval of the job that you do. They feel they're in good hands. Yes?
Absolutely.
Hope so.
That was extremely satisfying to see the 2014 and 2015 Boston Marathons go out without a hitch and just be tremendous successes. And that goes to the key tenet that we will never let terrorists alter our way of life here inside the United States. We will make ourselves better, we'll make ourselves stronger, despite terrible tragedies, but they will not alter our way of life.
You're all three to be commended for your professionalism in handling this extraordinary situation. I want to now open it up to the floor, because we do like to hear what's on your mind, and invite you to ask questions of our panelists. And whenever you want to get started, you can. And I'm always having trouble seeing through the lights, so raise your hand, and I'm Frank. Up here. Yes, sir. Got a microphone coming to you. You can tell us your name, where you're from, and then fire away.
Yeah, Ed Gibson, Washington, D.C. Many times in occasions like this, or where people are killed, most of us feel a sense of retribution against the person who participated. Did this fellow feel any kind of remorse? Did he say, "I'm sorry"? Anything to show that he was human?
Carmen, you might stand for the trial.
For the trial, at the sentencing hearing, when he had an opportunity to also speak, he did make a statement indicating that he was, I'm not even sure that he used the word sorry, but it was more like regretted what the victims were put through, and what they had to undergo. But I think some of the survivors felt a sense of gratitude that he had said something. Others felt that it was way too little, too late. And so, each person, I think, had to evaluate really the meaning. Was there real sorrow there. One of the things that was noted and that many of the journalists wrote about was how he sat there in court during incredibly traumatic and really painful testimony, with victims describing horrible events, terrible pain and suffering, crying, clearly emotional, impacted, and he sat there very stoic, very still, showing no emotion, and everyone wondered how that was possible. And then remarking how he did show emotion when there was someone, I think it was an aunt who testified, who had come to testify in court on his behalf, and at that point he had shown some emotion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Looking on this side, you have a microphone. Okay, right here. Yes.
I was wondering what you all thought of the media, not only because of the false, blaring about, innocent people, but I know myself, I was thoroughly disgusted with the Rolling Stone magazine.
Sure, I'm sure quite familiar with that portrayal of Joe Carson-Naya in Rolling Stone. The cover shot was a fairly airbrushed portrayal of him, and I'm sure many people have different opinions on the Rolling Stone magazine, but in answering your question to the media, we had media challenges that week, which we discussed today, but the media had to be, in the big picture of things, our ally. We needed the media to get out the information that we were collecting regarding these individuals. We needed the media to take an interest in the press conferences that we were having so we could communicate to the citizens of Boston and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts what we were doing and what we could share with them in those press conferences. So, and certainly the media was our ally at the big press conference we had that Thursday evening, where we displayed the photographs that we had collected that week. We needed the media to take an interest in that and disseminate those photos worldwide to give us the best chance of identifying these individuals before they could do more harm. So the media cut both ways that week. They were at moments challenging, but by and large we needed their assistance to communicate our ideas out to the American public and our evidence to the American public, to get the American public to help us. And the American public was just tremendously supportive of our efforts. We can't speak enough about the public support that we received, particularly that week.
It's very interesting. I interviewed John Miller, who's a former FBI agent, former network correspondent, current commissioner for counterintelligence and terrorism for New York City. And he points out, first thing he said was, this case should be dissected and taught at the FBI Academy and in every journalism school. Second thing he pointed out is that if you're going to be grading the FBI right now, it should be on changing its mission to, number one, fighting global terrorism, which she gives high marks. And the press right now, in figuring out how to deliver accurate news in this age of the internet and bloggers and social media, and how to really use more discipline than ever to get it right instead of getting it first. And that's an up and down battle, and it's going to be an ongoing battle. It's good to hear, and that I know elsewhere, that the FBI understands the potential for the news organizations to be an ally, to be a partner in getting your story and accurate information out to the public, where you are also an invaluable partner in getting information back to the FBI in any of these cases we're talking about. Okay, let's go to another question. Okay, we have a microphone up top.
Bill Earl from Northern Virginia. I think you mentioned that this is a political crime. And obviously, terrorists around the world are looking at this and their response and what happened and how it unnerved the population. What are the lessons learned about the next response, that it doesn't play into the hands of terrorists who really want to disrupt and unnerve people? They don't care about losing their soldiers, but they do like the idea of unnerving a population. So, maybe the volume of police response, the lockdown of the community may, at the time, have been the right thing to do. But is there a lesson learned about how to respond next time?
Well, I think, Bill, there are many good points there. I think there were certainly some lessons that I learned. I retired shortly thereafter from the FBI, about 3 months after the bombing. But one of the lessons I learned in particular was keeping fresh troops in reserve in a drawn-out crisis situation. That afternoon in Watertown, most of the FBI personnel there, many of the state and locals have been out all night since 1 or 2 in the morning, worked right through the night, all through the day, and by about 4 or 5 in the afternoon, we were absolutely exhausted. And I was a little bit late myself in bringing in reserve troops to come in and cover the evening shift at the command post in Watertown. We just couldn't continue working there. I was worried about my agents falling asleep at the wheels of their car on the way home that day because they were so exhausted. So one of the lessons I learned for future such events is to, when you realize that you're going to have a potentially long stakeout or manhunt going on, keep enough troops in reserve so you can go 24 hours in regular shifts. That's one of the key lessons that I learned. John?
Yeah, I'm the same thing with Watertown. You know, myself and Sergeant Pugilis were 2 of the 3 night patrol supervisors. We were taken off duty for 16 days. So our department was undermanned, understaffed. We needed help from the state police, and a lot of our admin officers, admin supervisors who usually go community policing and whatnot, they're back in patrol, trying to backfill our spots. So there was that issue also. But I don't think, even looking back on it, I don't think they could have done it any other way, safely. We didn't know where he was. We didn't know if he had gotten into someone's house and possibly murdered them and was driving somewhere in their car. We didn't know if he was in it, going to jump on the T with more bombs. We didn't know. So I had nothing to do with the decision, but I support it, and I think it was the best decision at the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. Down at the museum, we're working on our updated FBI exhibit, so a lot of this is fresh for me. And I would remind you who live in this area that in short order, through their methods, they at least knew who they were looking for. Think back to the DC sniper. And here's a case where an entire region was unnerved, and for good reason. And for the longest time, law enforcement didn't know who they were looking for, how they were traveling, and boy, that's unnerving. And I think the manpower that was thrown into this was because it was increasing, as at one point they knew who they were looking for, and then at the next point they knew where he was. And then that's where you found the manpower. And in so many cases, terrorism or just regular crime, if you don't know who the bad guy is and you don't know where to look, then it's kind of hard to throw bodies out. Okay. Thanks for your question. Yes, sir.
My name is Marcello Mazzati, Washington, D.C. Prior to 9/11, we didn't have the cooperation with the FBI and local police and stuff. Everybody played their own game. So you already touched on this about when you came in, you already had something set in place. Did you make any effort to make sure that from the bottom officer all the way to the top that everybody was involved, included, and then you had to check any egos at the door?
We had the leadership of the Boston JTTF. We had gone through many joint training sessions together. We had trained together. We got to, usually about every other month, we got together for lunch at a local restaurant and just dined with each other, just to get to become comfortable with each other. And that was part of the key point that I made about having outstanding pre-existing law enforcement relationships in place prior to a crisis. But that was so important. And no, I knew Ed Davis, I knew Tim Albin, I knew Carmen Ortiz. I knew I hadn't worked that much before with Ed DeVoe, but I had known of him, and we got to know him very well, very quickly. And who was the chief in Watertown. And so it was when we came together. John Gibbons, the United States Marshal in Boston, was a key player there in terms of resources he could bring to bear in protecting the courthouse. We all came together, we all cooperated, and when the decision was made that the FBI JTTF would lead the investigation, there was no backbiting, no backstabbing, no squabbling. It was a seamless decision, and everybody came together. But the key point to make in that is it was a team effort. The FBI couldn't have done it without its federal partners. The FBI couldn't have done it without its local partners like the Watertown PD, the Boston PD, the Cambridge Police Department. We could not have done it without them. We could not have done it without the Massachusetts State Police. The Massachusetts State Police provided the command post in Watertown that day and also had the helicopter up, keeping an eye on Joe Carr as we were closing on him in the final moments of the takedown. So it was absolutely essential that we had one team fighting one fight in a unified way, and we did during that week and in the weeks afterwards. The investigation, even after we arrested Jokar, there was tremendous relief, but at that point we weren't totally 100% sure that there might not have possibly been other conspirators that were out there. So we had a very touchy period for about 3 or 4 weeks after the actual apprehension of Jokar before we could run a variety of leads down and have a very, very good degree of assurance that we had identified and apprehended all the primary players in the investigation. So it was a stressful time right through the first week, but in the weeks afterwards, until we were quite sure that we had just arrested the 2 individuals who were responsible for planning and executing the bombing.
If I could add to that just a minute also, you know, I'm a line police officer. I was a patrolman for 18 years before I decided to take the test to become a supervisor. Only a supervisor for 5 years. Still consider myself a patrol officer. And we were helped immediately. We had from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, we had 6 agents come out. A stress team came out led by Carlos Canino, who I went to high school with. He was a Watertown high school kid, went out into the ATF, did a lot of different things for them, ended up on this team, and he brought his team out. They stayed with us for a week and worked with us every day. They came back at 6 months, they came back at a year, they came back at 2 years. And we've become very close friends with most of these people. And you know, I don't know what we would have done. They said when they came in the first day, they said, listen, 7 of you guys involved in this gunfight, half of you guys won't be cops a year from now. You'll be retired, you'll be somewhere else, you'll be, you know, this, that, and the other thing. We're all, every single guy still a cop. A couple of guys went to state police. One officer went to the state police. But everyone else is still working, and that's a tribute to them and his team, keeping us, you know, emotionally intact.
Thank you for questioning. Do we have a microphone over here? Yes, go ahead.
Hi, folks. Harry Marcus from Bedford, Massachusetts. As a fellow Massachusetts native, I just want to thank all 3 of you for every part of the phase of this moment in history. However, my question for you, it seems most of our audience here is from the Washington, D.C. area, so I feel obligated to ask you guys this, but please, I would like each of you to tell me one experience or multiple that from the community in New England that truly surprised you, whether it was, you know, professionally or personally, from the people you guys encountered throughout the week.
Well, Harry, one thing that occurred in Watertown weeks after the bombings is that Chief DeVoe, I don't recall, John, if you were there, but there was a residence in Watertown there, and they had been so kind as to basically open up their residence to us so that law enforcement officers who were working through the night and through that day could use their bathrooms. Something as mundane as that, you know, we had that need, you know, and they opened up their house to us. And as a show of appreciation, I and Ed DeVoe and Ed Davis, probably Colonel Tim Altman, Al Carmen, you might have been there, we went over to that house, we thanked them, and we brought them little tokens of appreciation from our respective agencies. But tokens of support that are seemingly relatively mundane are so meaningful to law enforcement officers like that in a time of crisis, just to be able to use a bathroom when they're hunting for a mass murderer who's just murdered 3 people and grievously wounded over 250 others. Tokens and displays of support like that from the public were so meaningful to us, and I took great joy in going over to that residence in Watertown and presenting that family with some tokens of appreciation from the FBI as our state and local partners did as well. Something like that was very meaningful.
I think I was tremendously touched and impacted by the way that the victims and survivors responded from the moment of the attacks. Many folks that were there on Boylston Street, you know, ran towards others that were hurt, you know, went towards danger instead of running away from it. I think the way that people came together that were there, that lived it, that were in harm's way, and that were actually harmed, responded in such a courageous and strong fashion. And it carried through the process. And at trial, you could see the sense of camaraderie and really of belonging that they all felt towards one another, and that they did that. And I think, Bill, to your question about how when terrorists try to, just shake you so that you don't even know whether you're going or coming, I think that week what you saw were people who, even though they were in harm's way, really stayed there, helped one another, and helped stay strong throughout this entire process, and really, I think, forever and going on, because people will never be the same who have lived through this.
Anything to add, Joe?
Well, for me, again, I'd have to say it's the friendships that I've made with victims, survivors, other police officers, everybody, police officers. I've been to many different organizations telling my story, and just the welcome that you get from other law enforcement officers saying, hey, Sergeant made us look good, and I really appreciate it, and it keeps you going. It really certainly does. I mean, people do care. People care out there. I mean, there's probably a lot of police officers and friends of police officers in this room, but as we all know, we're not loved by everybody, and it's good to know that people have our backs, and I'm proud of that, and I'm happy.
Thank you for the question. We have a microphone over here. Speak up if we do.
Kathy from Manassas. John, this is for you. You mentioned that you and your fellow officers had support, but listening to that tape and the gunfire, I could only imagine how terrifying it was for the people who lived around that. And I was wondering if there was any kind of emotional support for those people, because they must have been terrified.
Well, that kind of goes back to the last question. A lot of those friends I made are those people. I'm down on that street quite a bit. They actually, the tree that I consider saved my life took 4 or 5 bullets for me. The gentleman who owns the house and the woman who lives next door are very, very close friends of mine now. We go down there. I go down there quite a bit. I talk to the people, the residents that are there, and they all know me. They all know me by name. And I told them we went through this together. I know I was out here, you were in there, but I really consider you guys part of this. And we've talked it out. And but the Watertown Police Department was very, very giving to these people. Who our acting chief now was a captain back then, Captain Raymond Dupree, and he did an unbelievable job. He went out to all these people and found out the people that weren't insured or underinsured, and made sure that he get the people whole, took care of their cars. One family had a couple of cars sitting in their driveway that didn't have any windows after the gunfight, and unfortunately, they weren't registered or insured, and he took care of it for them. And it's the same thing, all they have to do is ask, and they know that. And, some of them do ask, a lot of them don't. But I think just with us letting them know, hey, we're here. If you need anything, please give us a call. And, we follow up on that, like, 4th of July, we went down to that neighborhood for first year and the second year. 4th of July came up, and we went around to the people in the neighborhoods and said, hey, listen, these people have been through a lot. You probably don't realize it, but fireworks are gonna hurt these people. A lot of the kids were hurt by it. Please, if you're gonna do it, let's try to bring it to another section of town. Let's give them a break for a couple of years and try to help them out that way. So we are trying to support them as much as we can, and I think all they have to do is ask, and we will help them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Over here, microphone. Who's got the mic? Here we go.
Hi, Mike from Rockville. A question for the prosecution. When they had the misidentification of the individuals, that's going to be a prosecutor's nightmare. What lessons did you learn, or what strategies did you create to handle that kind of situation? God forbid it happens again.
Well, that was one instance where the two young men were misidentified and the photos came out in the paper. And that was one where my public information officer, we heard that that individuals had showed up at the school, high school, he was a high school student, I believe, and wanted to sort of, they thought that he was a potential terrorist and wanted to take matters into their own hands, and this young man's life was endangered, and so there was protection brought to law enforcement, but we contacted the media to try to correct the record that these are not the suspects. These are not individuals who have been identified, and there's been a wrong, misidentification. What could have been done differently? I can't think of anything. What happens in those situations is the media is desperate to get it first. I think they want to get it right, and many times they think they get it right, and they're relying on sources that think they have the correct information, but they're wrong. And just trying to stay ahead of it, we could not correct every piece of misinformation. There was too much of it, and the other thing is you're learning it. You're getting the information just as well, and so even though you may think at that moment it's incorrect, 2 hours later it could be correct, or you think it's correct and it's incorrect. So we have to be careful, and there were 2 instances where we did contact media and say, you have it wrong, you need to correct it, people are going to get hurt, and so forth. And that was in the misidentification and in the piece of information about we have an individual in custody when there was no one in custody.
Thank you. Microphone on this side.
I think we have one in the middle here.
Yeah,
Okay,
in
the middle. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm John from Miami. I work at a law enforcement agency here in DC. My question is, you guys had mentioned that you guys were receiving so much information from the site that even the site crashed. How did you guys vet that information, and how did you prioritize that information? And did you follow every lead, or did you, prioritize it and determine, how you're going to go about your resources?
Sure. Well, we had resources set up. We had our command post set up. We were receiving telephonic leads, which every telephonic lead gets into a system we call Orion and gets triaged through that electronic system. That didn't crash during the investigation. But in terms of triaging the video evidence and the photographic evidence that we were receiving, obviously we were looking for evidence from closest proximity to the bomb blasts, and that was the one that was going to give us the greatest chance of identifying those who placed those bombs there. And I remember when I first saw the video of Jokar that was taken in front of the second bomb blast site. Our analysts had to look at that video hundreds of times before they finally discerned that there was something odd about the way this individual with the white hat and the black backpack was acting. He wasn't acting similarly to the others that were there truly to enjoy the marathon and to enjoy the afternoon there. And that's how we focused on him. And that video was a very moving video, and it really gave us the first indication that this was the individual who placed that black backpack down there. In the first hours after the blast, we collected evidence at the site that there was a black backpack at that site, and when we linked that to Jokar carrying that black backpack to the bomb blast site, along with the white hat, we knew we had at least visually identified the first bomber.
Good. Okay, our microphone is where?
Oh.
Go ahead. Right up top.
John Harasak from Northern Virginia. 2 questions, one for the sergeant. What information did you have initially when that vehicle was coming toward Watertown? And secondly, for Ms. Ortiz, is this investigation completed, or is there anything ongoing in reference to the wife of Tamerlan?
I'll go first if you don't mind. We did not know, other officers behind me may have known when I started saying they're throwing bombs at us. I probably should have known, call that a clue in police work. Probably should have got that. Patrolman, not a detective. I didn't come to my mind. I had so much stuff going on. I'm, in command of the scene. I'm worried about everybody in their houses. I'm worried about my officers on the street. I'm worried about myself, trying to keep myself alive. I thought we were up against two carjackers that didn't want to get caught. Again, I just didn't have time to process the whole thing. As soon as it got cleared out through the intersection and I had a minute to think, it came to me, but I didn't know even as I'm wrestling in the middle of the street with him before he got ran over. I still didn't have it in my head that who these people were. Didn't know.
Interesting. And Ms.
Just in
Ortiz?
terms of the investigation, at this juncture, it is over.
Okay, good. Where's the microphone?
Hi.
Okay.
My name is Neil. I'm from Connecticut. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the challenges of trying a capital case in a place like Massachusetts that more or less doesn't like capital punishment on a statewide basis.
Well, I mean, you really just focus on the fact that you're going to select a jury that is willing to apply the death penalty if they find the evidence and they apply it to the law as is required, that they can actually provide a verdict that is for the death penalty, and they can render that kind of a sentence. If you are against the death penalty, or if you are actually for the death penalty so that you wouldn't even think about the facts and circumstances and evaluate all the aggravating factors and mitigating factors. It's very specific, it's very detailed, and I think that in terms of a death penalty case, the jury selection process is a very lengthy process. It took well over a month to select the jurors. There's individual voir dire, meaning individual questioning of the jurors by the judge and the lawyers to make sure that you can find out as much as you can to determine and conclude really that the individual can be fair, can be impartial, has no bias, and can make the decision to issue the death penalty if the evidence supports that type of a finding. And so even though the state, the media, for example, there are a lot of articles, a lot of papers, in particular, the Globe wrote quite extensively about the death penalty and how, they showed polling and so forth. But what folks forget, and I know this just from prior experience in this kind of in this kind of process, that jurors really try to do the right thing. They try to get it right. They listen to the jury instructions. They try to figure out the facts. They try to apply those facts to the law that the judge gives them. And so I knew at the end of the day, we just have to present our case in court, because that's where this case is going to be decided, in court. It's not going to be decided in the coffee houses or the parks or in the media. It's going to be decided by 12 people who, have been, thoroughly vetted, and who will make that determination by the evidence in the courtroom and not what's swirling around outside.
I asked just out of curiosity, how many in this room have ever served on a jury? Could you raise your hand? And it's really interesting. I have once, and you're absolutely right. The trial is what happens in that courtroom. But then when the jury goes to deliberate, I think you feel the weight and the responsibility of citizenship like nowhere else except when you cast a ballot in an election. I think, and you can feel it, and then it becomes a matter of the dynamics between those 12 people. What happens. It's not always smooth sailing. Sometimes, there's some of that give and take, but it's quite an experience, and unfortunately, I think it's an experience that not enough Americans have. So, that's just my little, okay. Where's the microphone?
We got one on this side.
Okay.
Hey. name's Steve Joy. I'm from Prince George's County, Maryland. Been a police officer there for actually 37 years now. But to the panelists, how has this case affected you, your personal lives, living in the spotlight? You see many major cases that are on the news. How has it affected you personally?
I reflect back upon the support I received from my wife and my son and my family members during that week, and my neighbors. I mean, it was just a time when we were totally consumed with the investigation, not just that first week, but the weeks afterwards. And really, we needed the support of our families and our friends and our neighbors at that time period to assist our families, because we were simply gone so much. And most law enforcement officers experience that several times during their careers when you're in a crisis situation. But the way that it affected me was just really being appreciative of the support from my family and friends during that, particularly that first week of the investigation.
I guess with me, it makes my job a little different, a little more tactical, the way I carry myself. I don't go anywhere without a gun anymore. I was never like that before. So it has changed me. I'm a little different, but I think I'm better for it. I'll keep myself and other people around me safe. So I think I'm better for it.
Similar to Rick, I feel tremendous appreciation and gratitude for what I do have. Seeing what others have gone through in terms of my family, my life, and I also feel tremendous pride and gratitude that I was in a position to really help in terms of the investigation, in terms of the trial, trying to comfort the victims, the survivors, trying to make things a little bit easier, a little bit more tolerable and acceptable, to explain things to them, to kind of ease the way through the criminal justice system, which is very, very complicated and difficult and painful, given what many of the victims and the survivors had gone through. So I think back that I in terms of putting the case together, working with the team, making certain trial decisions and so forth, I feel a sense of gratitude that I was able to be that, to play that role, to be helpful, to make a difference and to have an impact.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
Tom, originally from Norwood, Massachusetts, but a Capitol police officer down here now. In your opinions, were you surprised that they hadn't fled the Boston area 3 days later? And, in your opinion, why was that they hadn't left Massachusetts or the country? Anything? Hubris, incompetence?
I guess nobody can get inside their minds and know what their motivations were and what their escape plans were, if any. We know that, I believe that in the days after the bombings, until their apprehension on the evening of the 18th and the early morning hours of the 19th and the evening of the 19th, they went about their daily business, and they didn't attempt to flee. I believe Joe Carr might have traveled down to UMass Dartmouth at that time and spent some time down there. I believe Joe Carr was photographed in a Whole Foods store buying a gallon of milk an hour after the bombing. They went about their daily lives. They weren't hitting the road, heading westbound on the Mass Turnpike immediately after the bombings. They stayed around and figured they could probably get away with it. Fortunately, they didn't flee. They stayed in the area where we could track them down and find them. And it was just the tragic cost of them not fleeing was the life of Officer Sean Collier, obviously. But none of us that week could anticipate when we displayed those videos that a campus police officer would be murdered by these guys. And what we could reasonably foresee at that time was that more bombs could possibly go off in Boston, and after what John experienced and Joe Reynolds experienced that evening in Watertown, and Dick Donahue and other law enforcement officers, we knew they did have more bombs. And they were poised to kill and maim more people if they wanted to in the immediate days after the bombings.
Thank you. I think we're going to wrap it up there. And we have a question. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
No,
Kevin Lewis
good.
from Northern Virginia. There was some reporting that one of the brothers had been on a watch list, and there was some information from another country How much did that weigh in your investigation and then ultimately the prosecution, that information?
I'll let Carmen speak for the prosecution as to whether that weighed on that, but in terms of our investigation, no, Tamerlan was already deceased at that point, so he had been neutralized basically, and it caused us to look back and understand how what he had been the subject of was a guardian assessment approximately 2 years earlier based upon some lead information we had received from a foreign government that he was engaged in radicalization activities inside that foreign country. The lead came to us. We dispatched an agent to speak with Mr. Tsarnaev, to speak with others, family members of his, to speak with individuals at this college that he was matriculating at that time. And we did everything we possibly could under the Attorney General guidelines at that time to attempt to corroborate the lead information that was passed to us by that foreign government. Using the investigative techniques that we were authorized to utilize at that time, we couldn't corroborate that information. And we sent that lead back to that foreign government, and we asked that foreign government if they had any further information to send that to us. And unfortunately, we never heard anything more from that foreign government until after the bombs had gone off. So it was, he had come on our radar screens prior to that, but we had no indications when we took a look at him under that guardian assessment that he had any intention whatsoever of targeting any specific event in Boston, certainly not the 2013 Boston Marathon.
I think we have someone up top. I see the microphone pass up there. Yes, go ahead.
Robert Liebscher, Washington, D.C. You've just touched on something I wanted to explore briefly with you. It's pretty clear that and impressive that your interagency liaison and training program that was in effect for the Boston area was quite effective in as far as a multi-agency incident response goes. I was wondering about the international liaison and cooperation, aside from what you just said there, through either your your FBI legal attaches at embassies, through other agencies where there were no legal attaches, or through Interpol. Can you comment on that as terms of how valuable that was and how effective? Thank you.
Well, certainly the FBI was using every resource, both nationally and internationally, at our disposal. Most of the international liaison that was going on was being conducted through FBI headquarters, through the Counterterrorism Division at FBI headquarters, and through the International Operations Division at FBI headquarters with our legal attaches overseas. But we were using every human source that could possibly be in a position to report on this matter, every technical source that the FBI and our U.S. intelligence community partners had that could possibly report on this matter. All of that was being handled through FBI headquarters in Washington. And certainly, even though foreign government information might not have been crucial in the first week of the first intense week of the investigation, certainly as we tried to understand the Tsarnaev brothers and what their background was and what their history back in Dagestan was, certainly support from foreign governments was absolutely essential to allowing us to try to begin to understand their motives for committing a terror attack inside the United States. So really that was essential, not just in the first week, but in the ensuing weeks and months afterwards as the investigation continued at that time.
Thank you. We have someone over here?
One final one.
I'm sorry. One final one on this side.
Nicholas Lenny, I'm from Walpole, Massachusetts, currently live in D.C. And an agency that's not represented today is the state police in front of us. I was wondering if you guys could comment on what they brought to the investigation, the manhunt, as well as the prosecution, as they have more resources than local police departments, but they also have the ability to community police similar to Watertown, especially in a state such as Massachusetts where there is a very strong connection with communities in various areas. And if the state police played a very large role that is often overlooked by not only the media but in documentaries. Thank you.
Certainly, I'm sure John can comment on this, and I'll turn it over to him in a second. But the state police, as I mentioned before, were essential partners of ours, just like Boston PD, Watertown PD, Cambridge Police Department, and many others. As I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned this, but it was a state police helicopter that provided us the video feed of Dzhokhar in the boat as we responded to the scene in Watertown to David Henneberry's house, and as we set up the concentric rings of perimeter officers around that, and as negotiations with him commenced. That was absolutely essential. The state police, in terms of the resources that they can bring to bear on a statewide basis, that was very important to us. The state police were so Massachusetts State Police, led by Colonel Albin at the time, who was a good friend of mine and just a tremendous law enforcement officer. They were so consumed with what was going on in the Boston area and inside the greater Boston area that when we did the search of Joe Carr's UMass Dartmouth hotel room down in the southern part of the state, we actually utilized the Rhode Island State Police, with the consent, of course, of the Massachusetts State Police. Colonel Steve O'Donnell from the Rhode Island State Police sent his troopers up to assist us because the Massachusetts State Police was so consumed with what we were doing to look for Joe Carr in Watertown. So various state police departments contributed to that investigation. Mass State Police, Rhode Island State Police. We had troopers from New Hampshire State Police that came down. We had troopers from Connecticut that came up to Massachusetts. So we had FBI agents from dozens of field divisions, particularly evidence response team personnel who were there assisting us. So it really was, we pulled in literally over 1,000 law enforcement officers that week in that first crucial aspect of the investigation. John, maybe you can comment on that too.
Yeah, I mean, the night of my shooting, there was a state trooper there. He actually helped save Dick Donahue's life. Did chest compressions on him. His name's escaping me right now, and I apologize. But and he did a wonderful job. He came down to Washington with us. He was recognized by President Obama, and I believe got the top cop award with us. So yeah, the troopers that were there were great. Great to have them.
I also want to add that the state police were really invaluable, and also at the murder scene of Officer Sean Collier, because the MIT police responded first because the murder occurred at MIT, but then the CPAC unit, which is the unit for the state police that works with the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office, responded because Cambridge is in Middlesex County. So the state police actually processed that homicide scene. And during the course of the prosecution, they were also instrumental in providing witness testimony for some of the technical aspects of the trial. The FBI did a lot of the forensics and analysis, but the state police did do some of it, especially in the evidence relative to Officer Collier's murder. And they also provided the big command post at Watertown. So I don't know, you make a good point about being overlooked, but they were instrumental and more than an equal partner.
We hope you learned something from this episode and will join us next time for another edition of Encore, where we revisit past museum programs and conversations. A special thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of Encore, a series from the Precinct 444 podcast network by the National Law Enforcement Museum. Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the Precinct.